Great universities need great cities, and great cities need great universities.
50 years ago, the University of Texas at San Antonio was founded on the hopes and dreams of generations. On June 5, 1969, in front of the Alamo, Governor Preston Smith signed House Bill 42 into law on the back of State Representative Frank Lombardino, establishing UTSA as a university of the first class and the first four-year public institution of higher education in San Antonio. UTSA's founders recognized the university's potential to create prosperity and social mobility for South Texans, laying the groundwork for San Antonio to become what it is today, one of the fastest growing cities in our nation. As the university grew, so did its role as a driver of San Antonio's knowledge economy. From dirt roads emerged the main campus, followed 2 decades later by the downtown campus. Today, the university's 4 campuses proudly represent just how far UTSA has come in 50 years.
What's wonderful about this city is that it's multicultural, it's vibrant, it's a place where young people want to come and live. It's a city with rich communities and rich heritage. It's a city that's on the move. It's a city with great future potential.
Today, UTSA is fulfilling its destinies as a model for student success and a great public research university, preparing students to tackle our society's grandest challenges. An emerging research powerhouse, UTSA is shining a light on San Antonio with national recognitions for its leadership as a Hispanic-serving institution, for its military-friendly environment, and for its #1 cybersecurity program. Hailing from 47 states and 86 countries, UTSA is attracting some of the brightest students in our country, garnering national awards of distinction for their scholarly excellence. Through the dedication and hard work of so many, UTSA has collected a list of accolades that rivals universities twice its age. With plans to expand its downtown campus and initiatives to deepen student learning experiences and opportunities for career engagement, UTSA is focused on the needs of our growing city, answering the national call for a highly skilled workforce, attracting government and industry partners to San Antonio, contributing to the artistic and cultural life of the city, and expanding educational opportunities for our communities. UTSA's trajectory toward excellence is steep, but in so many ways it continues to fulfill the same purpose our founders intended 50 years ago.
San Antonio demographically reflects the future of almost every other city in the United States if you look ahead 20 or 30 years from now. So the fact that we sit here in the city of the future and we're a university that's young and still developing allows us to become very aligned with the city and where it's going.
The University of the Future, in the city of the future. Imagine just how far UTSA will go in the next 50 years.
So I want to start broad about the 86th session as we look back over our shoulder and ask if it was as good as everybody, including and most especially the media, says it was. Senator Flores, this is your first time at the legislature this session. You're not used to the media's hyping of good things and persistent criticism of bad things, probably both a little exaggerated, frankly. But we have gone full on, this was the greatest session ever. Was it really that good? Was it as good from the inside as the outside?
Well, thank you. Well, being that it was my first session as an actual member, it wasn't my first session of having to work at the Capitol and be on the other side. As a former state employee, you had to go before these committees.
Right, and you're not new to this.
Well, but as a member I was, and I'll tell you that from my experience, such as it is, the way we work together on big issues was very refreshing. It was something that I look forward to seeing in the future be even better.
The we in this case, Senator Flores, is House and Senate and Republicans and Democrats? Both?
Yes, yeah. House and Senate, and also our governor. because that's the other part of the equation, that while we work things together and
We're in the middle of the veto period, so be sure to say nice things about him.
Well, it's the truth. When we go through, we work hard to get bills passed through the House and the Senate. That's not an easy thing to do.
Yep.
And then we get them through, and then that's the beauty of the checks and balances of our government is he has that option.
Right.
And but all of us pretty much going on the, not being yes folks. But rather being yes on the issues that are important for our communities and for Texas.
Right.
That's what's very refreshing.
Representative Allison, you also are new to the legislature this session, and the theory coming out of the 2018 election is that the voters delivered a message: cut the crap. Don't focus on things that don't matter. Focus on things that do matter. Do the meat and potatoes business of the state, and then go home. Act like the part-time legislature you are. That seems to be what happened. Whether you heard the message or not, that seems to be what happened.
I think that definitely happened, and I think what was so impressive and reassuring was I think the focus remained on those key issues, primarily, if not exclusively, property tax and school finance and education reform from day one.
Yeah, as you campaigned in what was formerly Speaker Strauss's district, and you had a contested primary, you had a general election contest, you heard from your voters in that district during the last election: public education, property taxes are our priorities.
That was it. That was it, without question.
And you all lived up to that. Representative Minjarez, it's easy to be cynical. We have heard public education identified as a priority for how many years at the beginning of the session? We hear, this is the session, we're going to fix it. I interviewed Tom Craddock, your colleague, the former Speaker, Dean of the House, who is in his 51st year. Older than UTSA, right? In his 51st year in the Texas Legislature. He was elected in 1968 to represent his district in Midland along with Richard Nixon as president. And I said, Speaker Craddock, when you got into the building in January of 1969, what were you talking about on the first day? He said, school finance. You've been talking about this forever, only this time you actually were able to get something done.
We did, and we've got to give a lot of due to my colleague, Representative Diego Bernal, for his leadership on that.
It's gonna be all downhill from here for the next hour, I'm warning you. So what was the difference maker? In the past, the Supreme Court of Texas has come back and effectively put a gun to the heads of legislators and said, you have to fix this. You did not have that same pressure this time. Elections
have consequences, and the people and teachers throughout the state of Texas made their voices known. And in addition to that, we had, of course, a new Speaker of the House. I think the leadership of the state of Texas understood that voters were serious and they wanted something done with school finance. And because of that, that's why we got something started, and hopefully we're on the road to a good thing.
And you all got marching orders effectively from the presiding officer of the new Speaker of the House, the presiding officer of the Senate, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor. They were quite clear, and they were singing in three-part harmony from the very beginning. This is what we want you to do, and that's a help.
Right, and so when you get everyone in sync and understand the importance of an issue, it's amazing what we can get done.
Right. Representative Bernal, I hate to have my heart broken. And so I want to believe that you all actually had your acts together, that there wasn't something that I'm not seeing. I mean, it really did look like a functional legislature. This is my 14th session at the Capitol. I am not used to this. This is weird. But you guys seemed functional.
I think for the most part we were. And I also think it's important to point out that the House started the school finance conversation last session. There was a school finance bill last session.
There was.
And part of that exercise was to sort of raise the awareness of the nexus between school finance and property taxes.
Right.
I think you've got a much more educated populace now for that issue. That bill died, and we got the School Finance Commission in return, which I wasn't especially happy about, but it worked out. And so by the time the session came around, a lot of us, including Chairman Huberty and I, had spent way too much time together.
Right.
And so we were already doing the work before the session started. The session was almost for editing and punctuation, but the work had been teed up years prior.
Right, but there was no guarantee that the House and Senate would get along, and there was no guarantee that when you got into the weeds on that bill, Representative Bernal, that you were going to be able to agree on the big things.
Right.
I mean, honestly, it seems it's quaint to say it, but just a year or two ago, we were debating whether more money going into public education was a good thing.
Right.
We didn't even have agreement on that across the board.
I wouldn't use the word we. I would say some people were saying that. The rest of us weren't.
Well, the royal we.
Right.
Right. But even that seemed to fall by the wayside.
Right. Well, that goes back to what Representative Minjarez said, is that one, elections have consequences.
Yeah.
And two, let's also point out that it's not just that elections have consequences, but the two top statewide leaders' elections did not track one another. In other words, the lieutenant governor and governor's elections weren't mirror images of one another.
Right.
They
In
were-
the past, they'd both won by about 20 points. This time, governor won by 13, but lieutenant governor won by 5. And you think he heard that as a
Well, I think he heard
as
that.
a
I think the complexion of the House changed, and to some degree the complexion of the Senate changed.
Right.
And in large part, people were voting that way not because people were becoming necessarily, they're switching parties, but because they were frustrated that their priorities weren't being addressed.
Senator Flores, you and I have talked about this many times from the time that you were first elected, that when you traveled your very large district, much of it is rural counties, right, from here west, you heard about rising property values and property taxes and inconsistent and sometimes strangely assessed appraisals. This was really the big issue in your race for the Senate, was it not?
Yes, sir, it was. It's something that I've heard consistently over the last 3 years.
Yep.
And something that we campaigned on. I mean, it's the big ideas, if you will. And yes, elections do have consequences. That's why I'm here.
Right.
And those were the things that whether it was here in San Antonio or small Sanderson or Pecos, any community, whether you were rich or whether you were poor, property tax reform was the #1 issue because we've had it. We just had, it's unsustainable. It was unsustainable. Public education was something that was absolutely on their mind. Public safety, infrastructure. Those are the things that we heard primarily. And we were hearing it all over the state.
Right. And as you heard it, Senator, the message was essentially, I think, it seems to be 2 parts. One was, we send you there to do this, and if you don't do it, we're coming for you in 2 years.
That's
right?
the way it should be.
Yeah.
That's the way it should be in whatever public office you hold,
Right.
that you're there for a purpose, and that purpose to be a public servant and to carry out, especially primarily the basic functions of government. And so it's no matter what you call yourself, you must report to duty to carry that out. And that's what we did.
So, Representative Allison, the accountability piece of this is going to come now that you're back home, you're in the district, you return to your community, to your family, to your constituents, and you're going to be talking about the byproducts of this session for the next little while till election comes. So let's take the property tax piece first. Are we going to feel, now I'm going to get cynical, the way that you're used to the media being, are we really going to feel the property tax reform in our pocketbooks that you all have crowed about having passed?
There's going to be slight feeling, excuse me.
More of a tickle than a punch in the face.
Initially.
Yeah.
But I think we need to look at it, and the speaker from day one, I think, said it very well, that we need to look at it as property tax reform rather than relief initially. And I think that's what we see. Although when you combine the property tax bill with House Bill 3, the school finance bill, there is some realistic and meaningful tax relief.
I guess what I'm thinking of as I ask this question, Representative Allison, is the 2006 swap out of the business tax and the property tax, and the idea was, well, we're going to create real relief that's going to be felt by voters, by constituents, by Texans. And long after that 2006 tax swap, there were people who said, I didn't even realize that we got a tax cut in the end because it didn't show up in my paycheck or in my house in a meaningful way. And the cynical view of what you all just did, which was something, is, and yet, are people going to be saying the same thing this time?
I don't think so, and I think that's the approach that was taken, that there'll be a long-term effect.
Long-term effect.
From what we accomplished this session, so we won't have the 2006, 2011 situation.
Right.
But have to be realistic and look, and it's going to be incremental.
Right.
So I think there's been some projections, maybe from the Tribune, that on a $250,000 home example, there may be only $200 to $300 in tax savings. But I think that's very meaningful from where we came from.
And there are a lot of Texans for whom $300 is not nothing.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, we should not be that cynical.
And we're moving in the right direction.
Right. When you go home and campaign, Representative Allison, this election season, are you going to say we cut your property taxes? Because you didn't really cut our property taxes. You just changed the way that property taxes are levied, right?
That's correct. And I think we have to present it again. It's a combination of school finance and property tax, and there's a nexus there. That's why I think the stars were all aligned. It was a perfect situation,
right.
Because if you look at your tax bill, the highest amount is school taxes.
It is.
50%.
Right.
So to address school taxes, you have to address property taxes.
Representative Bernal, this is what a lot of people don't understand, that in order to put more money into the public school system from the state, you first had to reduce the amount of money coming locally.
Right.
Right? Can you give the kind of, School Finance 100 sort of basic level short course here on exactly how this worked?
Yes, I can.
Please.
All right. Let's imagine this model is every school in Texas, and let's say that before this bill happened, 36% of the water came from the state, and the rest of the water came from local taxpayers. After this session, the state share was going to go to about 46 or 47%. So I don't think that people will feel it a whole lot in their pocketbook, but I think the message that the state is stepping up to the plate and taking care of more of its share is important. Right. But it's that. And then the education part of the bill actually grows the size of the bottle.
That's pretty good. As short courses go, that was actually pretty excellent. I have to give you credit for that. Representative Minjarez, doesn't it seem weird that the state's share of public education funding has been in the mid-30s? Doesn't it stand to reason that it ought to be higher?
It's been a travesty. It's been that way for so long.
Right. It was closer to 50% before that tax swap in 2006, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So, now we need to be, we're at 46. In my opinion, we should be back at but 50. But this is a good start. And so hopefully, the one thing that I do have concerns about in regards to the property tax reform, and you've heard this in our debates on the floor, was we didn't deal with appraisals in the appraisal process.
Right.
So I hope that's one area that the House will look at in the interim and maybe see how we can deal with that next legislative session.
Because if appraisals keep going up and property values keep going up, it can very quickly eat up whatever reform you've put into place. Right. Senator Flores, again, this is a topic we've discussed before, that we have 254 counties. We have 254 different ways of appraising property. And I mean, this is, for a legislature that loves to say, we don't like an inconsistent patchwork, right? Yeah. Whether it's on ride hailing or bag bans or tree setbacks or whatever else, couldn't you all come in and work your similar local control magic on the appraisal system?
Well, that's one issue that I think I agree, we need to do a lot better at. Yeah. And of course, we're dealing with a huge, old system. And there's a lot of fingers in the pot.
Yep.
And they really are. But Senate Bill 2 addresses a methodology of uniformity from the comptroller, working with our tax appraisers to be able to come up with a consistent formula. So that was a good step in the right direction. It needs to be better. There needs to not be 254 different ways to do this. If I live in Ventura County and it's different from Bexar County, it's different from Wilson County, and it's pretty much by their will, and that's not fair. It needs to be, appraisals need to be separate from the taxing entities. They shouldn't have taxing entities be on the board for the appraisal districts. The appraisal district's job is just to come up with the values, and they shouldn't be concerned one iota about what the tax rate is. But it's kind of over time, kind of molded together.
Right.
So those types of issues, to give us a fair fight, we filed a couple of bills that would have been immediate impact for our citizens. One was changing the composition of the board of directors to make them elected officials that were directly responsible to the voter.
And would provide real accountability in that they could get busted at the polls.
Went to the Senate unanimously and got held up in calendars like a lot of things do. Yeah. Well, not your fault, man. I hope.
I was about to say, here's a little House versus Senate action. This is good. I like this. Wait,
but that bill is something you'll see again. Another one had to do with $5,000 if your taxes went up. $5,000 or less, instead of having to file, if you didn't pass your ARB, that you, instead of having to file a lawsuit, currently you have to go to district court, file a lawsuit, hire attorneys. it would go to JP court. JPs have $10,000 or less in civil jurisdiction. It's a people's court. You go to your own judge. It's fair. It's immediate. It's something meaningful.
Right.
Those are things that one is going to the governor, and I trust that he'll sign
Expect
it.
that gets signed. So to the point about the counties you mentioned, rural counties and urban counties, say, being different and needing different things. This was an argument against the principal property tax legislation that passed this session, that you were saying we're going to reduce the threshold beyond which property tax revenues can go up year over year down to originally 2.5%, ultimately it hit 3.5%. In some of the counties you represent, Senator Flores, that 3.5% threshold may be fine, but in some of the urban counties where public safety costs are going up by more than 3.5% year over year, or other costs are going up by more than 3.5%, local officials complain that you are hamstringing their ability to raise adequate revenue to provide city services. Now that's been litigated and you guys won that.
I'll address that if you'd like me to.
Please.
Those rates were, as we started to dig into the weeds in this subject, and it's a lot of weeds, by the way. The 8% was set during the Carter administration when hyperinflation was about 13% and running rampant, if you remember that. And then the legislature set it at 8%. But the intent was to set it, to be able to adjust to the rate of inflation. But then again, it was running so wild that they set it at 8%, and it stayed that way.
Never came down.
But meanwhile, it stayed at 8%, and whether whether you need it or not, or whether for whatever reason, you get 8%, you get 8%, you get 8%, and the rate of inflation was continually going down, and right now it's around 2.1%. So if the rate of inflation is right about 2.1%, 2.5 is actually generous, and 3.5 even more. And they're only a soft trigger. That's all they are, is a soft trigger, which means that if you want to get more police, you want more fire, ask permission.
Go to the voters.
Ask permission. You yourself said something that I've used before, but you said, why are you afraid of democracy? Do you remember you saying that?
I did ask, yes, I said to
and this very question.
Right.
So don't be afraid of democracy. If the reason you want to raise up my taxes are so compelling on this soft trigger, other states have hard triggers.
Right.
Hard numbers. Ours is a soft number. Ask you permission.
Right. Representative Bernal, this did provide a rare moment of controversy in this legislature. There was a divide by the parties, not exclusively all Republicans for it and all Democrats against. Some Democrats crossed over. But there was disagreement about the wisdom of this change to the mechanism.
I agree, there was.
Yeah. You don't like it?
I don't.
Yeah. But couldn't, as Senator Flores says, couldn't the mayor of San Antonio or your former colleagues on the council, couldn't they just go to the voters and say, we need to do X, we're going to make the case, and then we're going to get that money from the voters?
They could, but I don't think they should have to. Plus, what happens in a city is much more dynamic. It happens very quickly. You can't predict 8 months in the future, and on top of that, who's going to pay for those campaigns? Who's going to fund those campaigns? You're adding politics to general governance.
You think there's a cost associated with it?
How do you win an election without spending any money?
Right.
Right. And then on top of that, I personally believe that the city taxes in particular, the city and the county taxes in particular, are not nearly as much of the problem as the school taxes. I saw this as a way of saying we know that we've been derelict in our duty for years and years, going back to that 35, 34%.
Yeah.
But we want to spread the blame around so it's not just our fault. We want to make it seem like they're responsible for what's happening in your pocketbook and your tax bill as well. But I see this as being more symbolic and not affect taxpayers much. But if you're a city, if you cost out what this is going to do if you don't do the election, they're going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars over a period of time.
Well, we're going to see. One of the things about elections have consequences, so do legislatures. They have consequences, and we'll see what the byproducts of this are. Now, back to what this legislature did. The education bill is the signature achievement, Representative Bernal, of this session. Everybody says historic in many respects. Everybody got together on the same page. $11.6 billion in HB 3. A portion of that is property tax buy-down, and then a portion of that is investment in public education. Is it enough?
It's never.
Seems like a lot.
It is a lot, but is it enough? No, because there's still things that we need to do. I've got a list of things I want to get done next session that we didn't do this time, but it's a big step in the right direction. It's a tremendous building block. I don't want to downplay it. It's big.
What are the 2 or 3 most important components if you're retail politicking and telling people in a very short period of time, here are the most important things we did in this bill? What are those 2 or 3 things?
Pay teachers more.
Pay teachers more.
And have dynamic payments. So you're going to identify who your best teachers are and pay them more to go to the schools that need them the most, like my middle school, Tafoya Middle School,
right.
or JT Brackenridge. If you guys know these schools, you know what I'm talking about. Full day, high quality pre-K. There's money for that. So there's that. And then, especially for our city, we live in the most economically segregated city, one of the most economically segregated cities in the country. And so the way that our comp ed money, or the money for poor kids, is done now, instead of treating districts the same way, we're focusing on campuses and where the kids live and funneling more money to the kids who live in generational poverty than before.
So we're acknowledging that a difference in socioeconomic status of a family is a factor in the likely outcome of a kid's experience.
But we're also acknowledging that not all poverty is the same. And if you give me a minute to talk to these San Antonio folks about an example. So on paper, and I went to Jefferson, so I'm not saying anything bad about it, but on paper, Jefferson and Lanier look the same. And if you're from the city, you know that they are not. That those neighborhoods are different, that the challenges are different, that the generational poverty is different. I'm not saying Jeff doesn't have his problem. It's a very, very blue-collar school. But the idea that you would treat Jefferson and Lanier the same is honestly unjust. And so now, the baseline amount that a poor kid would get goes up, but there are now 4 degrees further that you can go to give a kid more money. And so Lanier would get more money than Jefferson because of the kids who go there and where they live, not because you're treating SAISD as one giant monolith.
Right.
That is very different.
Right, yeah. Representative Minjarez, as somebody who has been banging a drum for an investment in public education, I know you have for several sessions, is this bill ambitious enough?
I think it was a big win, but again, in due time, we'll see what we need to build on. As Representative Bernal was talking about, I represent part of Edgewood ISD. That school district has needed that help, so I am ecstatic at how much more money those kids are going to get and that community is going to get, because it's long overdue.
Right. Representative Allison, this is the kind of thing you wanted to do when you ran and got elected?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What aspects of it appealed to you? Your district, the district you represent, is a different district than the districts that Representative Bernal, Representative Minjarez represent.
Well, to some extent, I represent Alamo Heights, but also a large segment of Northeast and part of Judson, and a very small piece of San Antonio. So I see those needs. Alamo Heights has those needs. So what is often overlooked is 27% is on free and reduced lunch. There's that poverty level in Alamo Heights. So it's important that we reach out and address the needs of every single child in this state, and I think we did that. There's some additional segments of House Bill 3 that I think are vitally important and valuable. Dyslexia is addressed. That is just an increasing need throughout the state, and there's been significant attention given there. As far as whether it's enough, no, I don't think it is enough. You know, we keep talking about this 50% goal or ceiling, and it shouldn't be. Back in the 1970s, which isn't that far back, the state paid 70-some% of the cost of education.
But of course, the system was much smaller and the price tag was much less. We have 5.4 million kids enrolled today in the Texas public schools. 10% of all enrolled students in public education in the country are in the system in Texas. And we're adding 82,000 kids a year, or some number north of 80,000, right, to the system. So, I mean, it'd be hard to do 76% of that, wouldn't it?
But my point is, I don't think we need to stop at 50%.
You'd like to see more of an investment.
Very much so. Very much so.
Right.
And, you know, the economy back there, we're in a much better economic situation right now than we were in the 70s. And I think we can't lose sight of that. And that's one of the things that's going to make this sustainable and make it so important that if we keep the pro-business environment, the pro-economic environment that we have in Texas, this can be very sustainable.
Right. I want to come back to the business environment in a second and ask whether, in fact, this is sustainable. But I want to ask Senator Flores, you like this legislation? You were for this legislation?
I along with my counterparts and colleagues in the Senate, for 31-0.
Right. It was.
And
I mean,
as
really,
well as most everyone in
there was one
in the
no
House.
vote in the whole legislature against this bill.
This was something that was absolutely necessary, and it was not really a partisan bill. This was a Texas bill, and this was one of the rare occasions where you had a committee put together, and thank you very much, Representative Bernal, for your work on that committee, where the state actually took the recommendations and implemented them into law. Very rare in my experience. I don't know if you've seen very much of that in your experience, where you have all these committees and they never get implemented. But this one did, because it was necessary. It was necessary to be transformational because Texas required it.
So Senator Flores, two things that came up in this. One that originated with the Senate, and then another that's just that we now accept and we all applaud over it, but it's actually quite remarkable. We need to step back from it and talk about it. The first is teacher pay. So the fact is that the teacher pay component of this conversation was actually controversial for a while there. Maybe it's still controversial in the minds of some. I mean, who's opposed to paying teachers more? It's like being against motherhood, right? Everyone thinks that teachers should be paid more. But we started out with an idea that we should give every single teacher in the state of Texas, and this originated in the Senate, every single teacher, good teachers, bad teachers, and in-between teachers, a $5,000 pay increase. That was controversial, was it not?
Well, it could be for some folks, but for 31 members of the Senate who voted for it unanimously, we had to start somewhere. And to do nothing was unacceptable. So to start it, so we agreed in starting there in Senate Finance, which I got the privilege to serve on, for the $5,000 across the board.
Right.
And through the wonder of our process, of our great American process, it ended up to where it's at.
It got whittled down a little bit, but the principle was the principle.
Step out and start somewhere.
Right.
And what we were looking at was the recruitment and retention of our classroom teachers was a major issue facing us. And the fact that our teachers that had to go out and get second jobs, and we heard testimony from teachers, classroom teachers, telling their stories. 6 of my sisters are teachers. My wife was a teacher. So it's something that I understand clearly. But that was the logic of the Senate, was that we had to start somewhere, and we started with a base of 5,000.
Right. Representative Bernal, to some people that was a little bit like middle school field day. Everybody gets a ribbon.
Well,
right?
I guess so. The Senate bill, when it came over, was $16 billion. Right? That was the challenge. Is that the House sent over sort of the most carefully curated bill that we possibly could. The Senate sent it back with about $7 billion more than we had anticipated. I don't think anyone is opposed to making sure we pay teachers more, but unless that's the sole purpose of that legislative session, the $5,000 across-the-board pay raise would have eaten up almost all of the education dollars. And I think there were 2 things in terms of dynamism we had to focus on. The other is that districts are so different. Some districts are starting their teachers off at $35,000. Others starting their teachers off starting off at $60,000.
Right.
And so you wanted to add some flexibility, but you didn't want to leave them out. And then on top of that, again, you wanted to create an environment where you are incenting teachers, the best teachers, to go to the schools and in front of the kids that need it the most. And so I think where we landed was a really good place.
Right. Representative Minjarez, the other part that I think it bears commenting on, even though we kind of just glossed over it, was that everybody is now for pre-K all of a sudden.
That's right.
Right?
Right.
Now, San Antonio has a recent history of having voted as a community to raise its own taxes for the purpose of funding full-day pre-K for some number of 20,000 plus. Right. But it wasn't too long ago that the discussion at the legislature was that pre-K is godless socialism, that it was the state ripping kids from the hands of their parents.
Right, or it was.
And now all of a sudden everybody loves pre-K. What happened?
Right. I'm telling you, elections have consequences.
Right. Is that what it was? Seriously? Elections
have consequences. Not all of my colleagues are in favor of funding full-day pre-K before, last legislative session. And now it's
despite the fact that early childhood education was a priority of the governors, articulated as such in a couple of State of the State addresses consecutively, but this time it got done.
It got done.
This time.
It got done.
Right. Representative Allison, the perception of this session was that if you were not talking about public education or property taxes, see you next time. If you cared about other issues, jump up and down, stamp your feet, wave your arms. It was hard to get anybody's attention if you were not focused on those 2 issues. Now, that's not entirely fair. You did pass a whole bunch of other bills, didn't you?
We did.
Yeah. But were there things that you didn't focus on that you feel like now in retrospect, now that the warm glow of having passed SB2 and HB3 is beginning to wear off that you should have focused on?
No, I feel pretty good. The focus was on property tax.
The right things.
The right things, it was. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't focus and success in other areas. School safety, there's a tremendous success there. Mental health, been tremendous success.
In fact, as we sit here right now, I believe the governor is signing or just signed a bunch of mental health related bills.
He signed
House
Bill 18 that I had the privilege to join author with Four Price. Four Price did a tremendous job in the interim in the mental health area. This one's directed more at children in schools. The governor signed it on Monday. Yeah. But we went much further than that. There are other mental health bills that came through education, came through public health that are going to be vitally important to our children and beyond. Mental health is a problem for all of us. And I think we made some great strides there and still will continue on that went kind of unnoticed, and that's okay.
Yeah. Senator Flores, the fact is, again, your first session, but you know, because you've been there before, that a legislature does many, many things. Some of them are the visible parts of the iceberg, but there's a lot of it that is the submerged part of the iceberg. We may not see it, but it's there. This time, public ed and property taxes were the visible part of the iceberg.
Yes, they were, but the big part, which is also the biggest part of our budget, has to do with health and human services.
Right, and there are a lot of people who think, Senator Flores, that you all didn't do enough on that, and that this is not the first session that you didn't do enough on that. What do you say about that?
We got women's health care was increased significantly, and we all voted for House Bill 1. It was. Just the figures will speak for itself.
Right. I think Representative Minjarez just tweeted the shade emoji at you.
I will say that I'm most pleased to have worked very hard in Senate Finance to secure $190.3 million to rebuild the San Antonio State Hospital.
Right. Well, that is something, right? Yeah.
Something very important.
Right.
And you know, I served on Health and Human Services, and if you sit on that committee and hear the people that come before you, want to fund every one of them. Right. Every one of them. And
that's fixing to be the largest part of the budget at some
yes,
point.
Yes, it is.
Its costs are growing on healthcare.
But we can't. It's just like we were talking about with education. We have a limited budget, $250 billion. Right. And but we did the best we could, and could we do better? Yes, we can.
Right. Representative Minjarez, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to Senator Flores. Remember, this is the Kumbaya session.
Yes, so. It is the Kumbaya.
Yeah.
You know, I served on Human Services in the House last legislative session, and, you know, I respectfully disagree. You know, medically fragile children, there were a lot of cuts to their health coverage. Those weren't reinstated. You see, there was an issue in regards to the high number of women dying as a result of maternal mortality, especially women of color. A lot wasn't done to address that. And let's talk about the elephant in the room. Senate Bill 22, taking away much-needed money that was given to Planned Parenthood to address women's health care in the state of Texas. So no, I don't think we did enough to address health care in the state of Texas.
The discussion, Representative Minjarez, at the beginning of this session was that the sharp objects were going to be off the table. We're not going to talk about bathrooms. We're not going to talk about vouchers. We're not going to revisit the conversation around sanctuary cities, which really divided the legislature last time even more than the bathroom legislation did, right? So there was SB 22, the bill that prohibited municipalities from entering into contracts with abortion providers. There was the Chick-fil-A bill, which I don't need to share the details of about which with anybody in this room, right? Everybody knows. But aren't those the exceptions that prove the rule by and large, that the kind of controversial bills that are more campaign talking points, that are divisive bills, those two to the side, there wasn't a lot of that this session,
was there? Yeah, it was surprising. It was actually nice that we could focus on real issues that we needed to take care of. Of course, we always need to do more. There's a lot of need in the state of Texas, but with the exception of those particular social issues, I mean, we really got down to business.
Right, and Representative Bernal, it's not just the things that didn't happen, but in some ways it was the things that did happen or showed themselves to be possible. I've had conversations over the last few months with your colleague, Representative Celia Israel, who is one of the 5 members of the LGBTQ caucus in the legislature, to pick one area of legislation. Didn't have an LGBTQ caucus before because there were not enough out members of the legislature to have a caucus.
Right.
And this time, a number of bills got hearings, whether it was banning conversion therapy or allowing transgender Texans to be put under the hate crime statute. There were a number of things that got a hearing this time. Didn't get out of committee, didn't pass, but they migrated from the fringe to the mainstream.
That's right.
And made progress along the way. So in some ways, this was a very different session in that respect, not just for what didn't happen, but for what did happen.
I think there were more conversations happening that weren't happening before. I also think that Republicans had to face the fact that they've all got a gay brother or a gay cousin or a gay friend, and they were tired of having to defend the really bad decisions and the policy points. And so a lot of them, including, I think, Representative Phelan, at a certain point said, I'm done with this. I'm not doing this anymore. You want to focus on the bread and butter issues, or even if you want to focus on a cap, we'll focus on a cap. But we don't want to, I think a lot of them are done being on the tip of the spear on something that actually hurts people.
Right, and Representative Allison, I mean, just again, with San Antonio's issues and interests in mind, one of the things that happened as a consequence of this was the paid sick leave legislation, which in a legislature like the one we have should have been a layup for the legislature to tell Austin and San Antonio, you cannot mandate paid sick leave on businesses. There was non-discrimination language on the Senate side that got stripped from the bill, came over to the House reinserted it. Ultimately, that legislation died, didn't go anywhere because of an unwillingness on the part of not just Democrats, but Republicans to allow that to proceed without the non-discrimination language.
Right. So it never made it to the floor.
So how did you all not get rid of, I mean, I still stand back from this legislature and go, how did you guys muff paid sick leave? If a clean bill had come before the legislature, you had 2/3 of each chamber who would have told the cities you can't do this, and instead paid sick leave lives to see another day.
It does in the courts. I think that may have been the way out. And again, I think it's something that the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor did not want to see a divisive issue interfere with the focus points. And again, I think that's something to be resolved in the
We
courts.
need to go to questions in a second, but before we do, 2 quick game show speed round things. Just give me a quick answer, okay? Grade the new speaker, your 3 members of the Texas House. I'll exempt you from this question, Senator Flores. Give the new speaker in his first term a grade.
A.
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 And you both, as Democrats, I mean, you didn't know going in, right? I mean, you were for him all the way, right, going in.
I was for him.
Yeah. I mean, you guys, it was unclear exactly how this was going to turn out, but you feel like he did a great job.
Yeah, all
Did a
things
great
considered,
job.
an amazing
Okay,
job.
right. Are you running again?
Yes.
Are you running again?
Yes.
You're running again?
Yes, an A for Speaker Bonin.
Oh.
I've known him a long time.
We'll go back in and
Known
edit
him a
your
long
grade.
time. He's a good man.
I thought Dan Patrick said that the Senate shouldn't mess with the House, so you're going to get in, but you give him an A anyway.
He's a good man. I've known him a
But
long
you are
time.
running again, and you're running again.
I am.
Right. You will have not much of a race if history proves. You will have not much of a race if history proves. You will not have much of a race if history proves. Hello, Senator Flores.
Well, hello.
You
We're
are
ready.
in the one competitive Senate district probably in the next election cycle.
Yes, we're aware of that. And,
Right.
But we were before.
Right.
And yet, nonetheless, we still won by 7 points, and we intend to do so again.
And you're going to fight. You're going to fight like hell to keep that seat.
Absolutely,
Okay.
like
Microphones down front. Come on and join us for the balance of our time. Questions, if you have them. I will ask you respectfully. Ask a question. Don't make a speech, and be nice to everybody. We've got to keep the kumbaya going for as long as possible. And we're going to stop at 1 o'clock. If you don't get to ask your question because we run out of time, my apologies. We'll get you next time. Whoever's ready first. Sir. Yes. I cannot hear you. Is that microphone working?
Hello?
Okay, so we'll get your microphone going. We'll go to her first and then to you second as we're getting that microphone working, I promise. Go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, good evening. I don't even know what time it is. Thank you all very much for the good bills that you put for our children with disabilities. But I do have a problem with it. That was a bill to address the issue that we have only 1 year limited to when we have problems with the school. That was House Bill 1093, and that was killed. It didn't even it was a hearing.
What was the subject?
It was a subject. Right now, I have a child with disabilities, and I've been fighting with the school district forever. The attorneys the attorneys that represent the school districts, they make between $80,000 to $100,000 in one due process. And then we have only 1 year to fight the school district. So by the time we get to there, we don't have money, we don't have attorneys to represent us.
Right.
So the only people that makes the money is the school district's attorneys, and that is abuse of power. That bill didn't go anywhere. It was killed in the House, and I was very, very disappointed because I have a child that right now going to school only for 3.5 hours, 4 days a week, and that is not fair.
Do any of you know about this bill?
Yes, thank you.
Representative Bernal?
I know a little bit. I
Quickly,
think
yes.
that one of the last frontiers in school governance that we haven't gotten to generally is due process. There is a tremendous black hole when it comes to due process, when it comes to students in the situation of for Granson and others. And so moving forward, that's something we have to get to. But the due process controls or lack thereof for students who find themselves in situations is still archaic.
That's maybe something that you attack.
For sure.
In the future. Sir.
A question, but first, Evan, you asked what was the key issues that were addressed
Yes.
in the House this session. Education was on the table, and we are at an education institution, so I will defer to that. But I want to know, as far as veterans issues that were addressed at the House, I know that Ina passed and worked across the line with Senator Campbell on women's spouses, military spouses.
Military spouses.
On May 8th is a day that they're going to recognize our spouses that served our veterans. So all veterans in the House
Yeah.
and all the spouses in the House. The question goes to the panel. And Diego, I know you've done some things, but I ask the rest of you, what have you done and why, if education was on the table, did we or did we not leave our veterans behind?
How good a session was this for veterans, Representative Allison? What do you think?
I think it's pretty good. I think there's such a strong sentiment towards our veterans that virtually any bill that came forward that was veteran-related, I think, received favorable treatment. Not just Representative Minjarez's bill recognizing Spousal Day, but more than that, tuition reimbursement, licensing relaxation for spouses. I think the veterans are held in extremely high esteem at the legislature.
Hi.
Okay. Hi. So I am an SISD kid, so I do see a lot of the education things, and I hope it does come through very soon. I do have 1 more year of my high school career, but kind of addressing the city as a whole, how is the Texas bill that passed, how will it affect our city and especially the kids in SISD?
Right, so when you do an education bill like the one you just passed, there are the so-called runs, which show
Right.
what the impact on every district would be. How does San Antonio come out compared to other districts?
The average increase for San Antonio per student is about $800. It's different per district because each district has a different number of kids, but it works this way. As you go through sort of top of the line in terms of wealth to the bottom, the amount they get is inverted. So the poorest schools like Edgewood gets more money than SCISD, which gets more money than Alamo Heights, but they all get a significant amount in increase.
Right. So if you're living in San Antonio, you're in San Antonio Independent School District, you feel like you got a good deal here.
They better.
Right.
Seth, is that right? Okay, thumbs up.
Okay. Sir.
This is a question for Senator Flores.
Yes, sir.
This session, environmental advocates and constituents ask you to carry legislation, namely Senate Bill 2385, that would have reduced the risk of cancer that the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality tolerates from polluted sites. For example, there is a site in your district that the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality gave a clean bill of health, which was later added to the EPA Superfund list of the country's most polluted sites because it's putting cancer-causing chemicals into the Edwards Aquifer. Why did you not carry that bill? And if you are reelected, would you commit to work on that next session?
As I remember that bill, that the TCQ had addressed that site, and the EPA had addressed that site. And so I believe that was the reason why we didn't carry that bill. I have dedicated my adult life to conservation and conservation law enforcement. And so I understand how important water and water resources in the environment is to our quality of life, and I would be glad to work with you and your group to address these issues in the next session.
Good. Sir.
Hi, my name is Noah Heredia. I've been researching electromagnetic radiation, and
Say again, you've been researching?
I've been researching electromagnetic radiation. So this covers the topic of the environment. In my research, I found that it actually harms trees. Phone masts that are in visual contact with trees, they actually begin to die out. Also, there's been studies on human tissue cells, and they found that it disrupts the electrical signals inside the cells. So I'm wondering if you guys will ever introduce a bill that will possibly address it and possibly try to hold back on electromagnetic radiation in schools and in hospitals and other things, because there's pregnant women who don't know that they're absorbing a dangerous amount of electromagnetic radiation.
Anybody?
At a minimum, it sounds like something that we should study, right? And so I think there's a lot of times the legislature doesn't want to have certain conversations because they're afraid of the answer. So I don't think anyone here would have a problem with filing a bill saying, let's get the smartest minds in the room and study it to see what we find.
Or you can contact all of us, and what happens in terms of the House, the Speaker will say, submit some ideas you think we should study, and we could submit that to the House, and then they'll make their decisions on what we study. Maybe that one will be one of them.
Good, thank you. Ma'am.
I know some of you from other things, but I'm also a CASA volunteer, and I'm going to speak about that today because a wonderful thing happened. A mother retained, I can't go into a lot of detail, of course, a mother was given custody again. There were drug issues and so forth. Y'all left an elephant in the room, in my opinion, because these are very poor people. Medicaid does not cover so many people. And in addition to this, there was a bill before you that would have made it easier for all these families to stay on Medicaid and to do away with this I'm not thinking of the word.
Was it the re-enrollment? It was
the re-enrollment every
Representative
month.
Cortez's
You
bill?
got to send in more paperwork, and it's very hard. We know that. I'm also, in touch with a lot of state employees. They are overburdened. What are you going to do about Medicaid?
So this falls, Representative Minjarez, into the category of something that people said heading into the session, maybe we're going to take a look at Medicaid, and not an enormous amount seems to have happened.
The term Medicaid, it's like a dirty word for a lot of legislators up at the Capitol. So what I will say, I was really happy that I was able to co-author with Philip Cortez, because I knew how important this bill was. And he worked incredibly hard to get it pushed. And it becomes a situation where he got it through the committee. I don't know at what timeline, if it got voted out or not, but it's really difficult if it's the majority of the House doesn't believe in that and won't push the bill forward. So there are legislators trying. They understand the importance of these issues, but if the political will isn't there, that's where the barriers happen. And again, this is something that, you should ask your legislators where they stand on that issue.
Rep. Allison.
I was on that committee, and it passed the committee unanimously. Philip Cortez and Ina Minjarez's bill. From there, one of the questions I have, and I know I was new, but calendars. Things go to calendar and die.
There are more bills than there are days, and there's more legislation than there is time, right? That's one of the things that happens.
I wish it was that simple.
Of course, Representative Bernal, if you want something to pass.
Yeah, I think this goes back to what Representative Minjarez was saying, was that the discussion on the floor about that bill was that people thought it was an expansion of Medicaid, and for that reason, it was dead on arrival. I think that's the shortest way to say what happened.
All right, let me ask the four of you a question about that. So since we're talking about Medicaid, I want to ask you about this. So Texas continues to have the most uninsured people in the entire country, both the percentage of our citizens and the raw numbers of our citizens. We lead the rest of the country. We have the most uninsured children, which is not exactly a superlative that anybody should be proud of right now. We're adding more kids to the uninsured rolls in Texas than we are adding kids to the public schools of Texas year over year, right? All around us are very conservative states whose state leaders said not only no, but hell no to expanding Medicaid, and then voters put it on the ballot, and voters said we want to expand Medicaid. Senator Flores, should we not, since we believe in democracy when it comes to property tax revenues, right? Should we give the voters of the state an up or down vote on whether they want to expand Medicaid?
Well, on any question, it never hurts to ask the boss. And
Right.
And the boss is sitting in the room. But certainly when it comes to Medicaid, a lot of my colleagues look at the fiscal note and the match. And that's, and as you said, the expansion.
Right.
But to answer your question, if there's anything, I mean, yes, I'm a firm believer in asking the boss permission. And if that's something that the appetite of the legislature to put on a ballot or a constitutional amendment or whatever,
right,
then do it.
All right, let's do it. We're going to start right here. Right. Let's go.
Representative Allison, I'm skipping over Minjarez and Bernal because it's like I know what they think on this. Would you be comfortable with the idea of voters going to the ballot in November and saying up or down on Medicaid expansion?
There was a bill this session
Right.
to do that, that again didn't survive. You know, I think the issue might be, I think there's a definite interest in increasing Medicaid. And I think the governor's made elaborate use of the waiver process to do that. And I think we saw some bills that call for increasing Medicaid. And I think there is some sentiment there, but I agree. I think there's some philosophical or other
right.
differences about expanding Medicaid from a financial standpoint. I think the numbers, I know you can see studies both ways, but the numbers just don't work long range.
Okay, sir.
Yes, thank you. So Hurricane Harvey was it was the largest rainfall event in U.S. history, dumping about 27 trillion gallons of water on Texas and Louisiana, and resulted in $125 billion in damage. And climate scientists say that storms like Harvey are going to continue to be a threat, and June 1st, beginning of hurricane season, who knows what 2019 will bring. When will the legislature address climate change and the impacts such as Harvey and other extreme weather events such as extreme droughts and hurricanes?
Representative Bernal, is this an issue for this legislature to deal with?
They're not going to have a choice. What I thought was really interesting to his point was that quietly on the floor in private conversations, a lot of coastal Republicans were saying, I can't keep saying this thing's not real. Because it's not just that they got flooded and parts of their districts were destroyed, but also there's a tremendous amount of anxiety from their constituents every time there's a dark cloud in the sky. And they anticipate that as storms continue, not just hurricanes, but storms, that's going to be worse than they saw before. So I think slowly, maybe unfortunately through tragedy, you're going to see this become more and more of a bipartisan issue because you can't ignore it. In a state like ours that's so close to the water, it's going to be impossible. So when it happens next session or the session after, I think you're going to see something on it.
Agnes? Got time for one more? Okay, ma'am.
Can I say one thing on that point?
Absolutely.
There was progress this session dealing with Hurricane Harvey recovery and preparation for the next natural disasters, which not only was for coastal events, but for any natural disaster all over the state.
Right.
And so that was done this session. In fact, it was one of the big fiscal notes was Hurricane Harvey relief and preparation for the next disasters.
And several $1 billion were spent.
Absolutely, that's
right.
not a small thing. That was done. So we are taking those issues very seriously.
Right.
And so that's for that. Just check it out and you see it to be true.
Since you spoke up, let me ask you: are you, to the questioner's point, willing to entertain a conversation around climate science?
Well, so you're asking me, do I believe in the climate change? And that's something that's been geologically happening on God's earth for eons. But I personally, no, I don't agree with it. No.
You don't agree with it? Okay.
I do not.
Okay.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Everybody be nice. Last question.
I'm going back to Medicaid, and this is directed at Representative Allison. You are my representative, and Senator Flores. I am a single mom raising 2 autistic children, and my question is related to the Medicaid waiver program. My oldest son has been on the interest list for that program since he was 3 years old. He is now 15. There are over 1,000 names ahead of us. My first question is, are you aware of that backlog? And my second question is, what are you going to do to fix it next session?
Yes, I think everyone's very aware of the backlog, and that's why I think the waiver program is so important to increase and better utilize, in addition to finding other ways to increase Medicaid coverage. And I think there was a bill that was passed for children that have developmental issues. I'm not using the right word. But if you give me a call, I'll work with you on the bill that I'm thinking of and see what we can't do for the next session. German Lopez does? Okay, good.
Democracy
Well,
in action,
with you
right?
afterwards.
There you go. Senator Flores, you want to say a word about that before we wrap up?
My staff is right there. Harold Stone's my chief of staff. Please, yep. And, well, yes, the answer is, yes, we were made aware of the backlog, and it's not acceptable. So let's work together to continue to hold Health and Human Services and those employees that are handling that to make them more efficient. So please communicate with Harold Stone, my chief of staff. Thank you.
Agnes, that's it? 1 o'clock? All right, well, it's 1 o'clock. I'm sorry for people who lined up to ask questions that we're out of time, but we are out of time. Please give our elected officials here a big hand. Thank you to them. Thank you to UTSA, and thanks to all of you. We'll see you again.